Thank you. Thank you. Everybody hear me in the back? When you hear someone talk about Arkansas being 45th or 46th or 49th in some sort of category of education or economic opportunity, have you ever thought or heard someone say, "Thank God for Mississippi"? Well, I've often heard it because Mississippi is usually 50th or 51st if you count the District of Columbia. Well, I'm tired of hearing that, but unfortunately the statistics are supportive of that notion. We're working harder at it, but when I came home from prison 4 years ago, I started an organization called Second Chance Mississippi. And our goal is to get dropouts back into the system. Not people who have necessarily been to prison. A few of them have, but we don't target that. We try to create a support network for dropouts to both get back into school and get a high school equivalency diploma, called a GED, and just as importantly, to get a work skill. So the numbers that the statistics are pretty dire in Mississippi. We have almost 500,000 adults in our state who have no high school diploma. That's 500,000. We have about 10,000 a year kids who drop out of high school. I think Mississippi is probably 50th in the number of high school dropouts as a percentage of its adult population. And that's why we formed Second Chance. Now, Mississippi has a couple of things that it's going for it that creates some raw material for us to work with. Mississippi is first in charitable giving. We are a very giving, charitable state. And we're also first in our community college system. And the community colleges in Mississippi have the mandate from the legislature to provide GED instruction, free GED instruction, and skill training, which is not free. And that's one of the things we try to supplement. You may ask yourselves, how did a disgraced trial lawyer who just spent a few years in federal prison come to an issue like adult basic education? Well, if you got time for our story, I'll tell you how we got there. When I was sent away to prison 10 years ago, they sent me to a remote federal prison in coal country, Kentucky, hardscrabble, USA. And I remember my first day in the chow hall there, I thought I was at a casting call for the movie Deliverance. I mean, there were some really hillbilly-looking folks in there, people with missing eyes, and a few of them had teeth. But so it was a bit of a forbidding environment there. And before I went, though, I asked one of my lawyers, I was ashamed and embarrassed, and so I asked one of my lawyers if I had to tell the other inmates why I'd been sent there. And they said, "No, you don't have to tell them. It's none of their business. The guards will know why you're there, and the prison staff will, and you know why you were there, but it's none of their business." I said, "Okay, great." I didn't want to have to admit why I was there. And so right off the bat, inmates, my roommate, started asking me why I was there. Well, one thing I didn't know was that about 20% of the inmates being sent there were pedophiles. And pedophiles are persona non grata among the general prison population. And for whatever reason, I fit the profile of a pedophile. And so when I got evasive and just answered, "Well, I made a mistake, I'd rather not talk about it," they said, "Uh-huh." So I didn't realize for the first week why everybody was avoiding me. I'd sit down at the chow hall, people would get up and move, and I said, "Boy, bribery's a bad crime, all right. But in here, you wouldn't think it'd be all that bad." But finally, after about a week, my roommate came up to me and says, "Bob Stone says you're okay." I said, "Well, great. Who's that?" He said, "Well, Bob Stone was turned out to be this inmate who was kind of the head inmate on that prison compound. He was a man about my age, been in prison maybe 30 years for killing a DEA agent. And but the guy had gotten a PhD while he was in prison. And he had read about my case in the Wall Street Journal. And he says, oh, no, he's not a pedophile. He's okay. So my roommate says, Scruggs, you don't know how happy I am that you are a legitimate criminal. Well, I had to laugh. So anyway, the word got around that I was a legitimate criminal, and I was okay, and had an education, had been a lawyer. And one of the things the federal prison system does right is if an inmate doesn't have a high school diploma, he's got to get a GED or stay in class until he gets it. And so a lot of these guys, not quite half of them maybe, but wanted to actually get a GED, to have something to show for the time they were in prison. And so they started asking me in 2s and 3s to tutor them in passing the GED. And the hardest part of the GED, for those of you who teach or know anything about this subject, the hardest part for most inmates, for most high school dropouts, is the math part. And so that was where they needed the help. Well, I went to law school, so I wouldn't have to take math courses. I mean, that was not my strong suit. But in any event, I sort of learned things that I'd forgotten or never really learned in college algebra and geometry and things like that to help these guys. And after 6 or 7 months of this, they asked me to be a full-time instructor. So 5 of the 6 years I was in prison, that was my prison job, was teaching other inmates math to get them prepared for the GED. The thing that, other than separation from my family and my friends, that was the worst for me in prison was the loss of any sense of purpose. All my adult life, I've always done things that I felt gave me some sort of a sense of self-satisfaction, a sense of purpose. I had represented thousands of shipyard workers on the Gulf Coast in asbestos cases back in the 70s and 80s. Represented Mississippi and 29 other states in the tobacco litigation that Zach mentioned in the intro. After Hurricane Katrina, I represented several thousand families on the Gulf Coast with claims against their insurance companies. I'd been involved in the Boys and Girls Clubs and lots of civic organizations, Rotary. I'd always had something going on in my life to make me feel good about what I was doing. And in prison, I lost that. I just hadn't. It was a hopeless feeling. And I realized after a few months of teaching that I was starting to regain a sense of purpose. Those of you who teach and have been teachers know the reward it gives you when you see the light go on in a student. Well, I was teaching grown men, and I got that feeling. It gave me a new sense of purpose. It gave me something to want to get out of bed for every morning. And a lot of these men wanted to get a GED, so for reasons you might not suspect. They wanted to reconnect with their families. Many of them had ruptured all their family relationships, and they wanted to be able to do homework with their daughters or granddaughters, things like that to help them reconnect when they got out, or just to get a job. Many of them had never had a job in their lives. And so those were sorts of tools that I could use to help motivate these men to go ahead and get that diploma so they would have something to show for the time they spent in prison and could reconnect with their families and maybe be worthwhile citizens and wage earners when they got out of prison. When I got home from prison 4 years ago, I found out about a GED program that the state of Mississippi was running through the community colleges. And I offered my services just to be a tutor, to help them out. There was a big crunch when the paradigm of the test changed, the GED changed in the first part of 2014, and it got a lot harder. And there was a big effort underway in Mississippi and really all over the country to get people to finish parts they had already started, because if you hadn't completed by January of 2014, you had to start all over again. And so I was offering to help out with that crunch to get people through. And I was asked to come down and meet with the president of Hines Community College in Jackson, which is the largest community college in the state. And he was more ambitious for what I could do than I was. He asked me to to consider starting a foundation, a 501c3, which ultimately became Second Chance, to coordinate and collaborate with the community colleges. I found out that the community colleges in Mississippi have the mandate, as I said, to provide GED training, but also to provide work skill training, which is every bit as important. And as I said, Mississippi has a really first-rate community college system. And one of the reasons for that is because they are trying to teach middle skills. They're teaching nursing, welding, commercial truck driving, robotics, manufacturing skills, any sort of skill that doesn't require a college degree, but it is in great demand with industry. And so we formed a formal collaborative agreement between Second Chance and the community college system in Mississippi to help them provide funding and support for their students. One of the biggest needs in this population, as you can imagine, is what's called wraparound support. Every one of these students is one flat tire from dropping out of school again. And there's no money available to help them with child support, with bills, with transportation, with any facet of daily life, that many things that we take for granted. And so the idea was to try to create a pool of money to be a 911 service for the community colleges to use for deserving students who had met these little life crises that prevented them from completing their GED and skill training course. And so we did that. Our whole organization, my son Zach and Caddy Beals worked with us. They're all here today. Thank you all for coming. And we started going around the state speaking at Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, civic clubs, and pairing them up with the community college in their area to provide that sort of wraparound support for the students in their local community colleges. And over the past 3 years, we've created a network with all 15 community colleges to do that. And then on top of that, we started sponsoring scholarships for students who had neither a high school diploma nor a work certification, where the community college would train them both for the GED and give them the work skill, like in manufacturing skills. The work skill part of it has a tuition associated with it, and it's anywhere from $250 to $850 on the average for one of these courses. That may as well have been $10,000 for this population that don't have the money to do it. And so we started with 50 students at one of the community colleges in Mississippi, where we agreed to pay the tuition for 50 students to go through a basic manufacturing course, and jobs were available right after they finished this course. They get national certifications for it. To pay the tuition, give each student $20 a week for satisfactory attendance. Doesn't sound like much, but it's amazing how important $20 a week in a gas card or a Walmart card can be. And a $250 bonus when they complete. We wanted to see how that was going to work at that one school, and it worked. It started working. The success rate is in the 70 to 80% range right now for that program, and we spread that around the state. We have in 6 different community colleges of the 15. We have programs like that going for a total of about 250 students, where we're paying their tuition, we're paying them a weekly gas card for satisfactory school attendance, and we're also giving them a bonus. And we've gotten buy-in from a number of organizations. A lot of civic and community foundations in Mississippi will partner with us in these endeavors. And one of the banks, Renaissance Bank, is a big bank over there, partners with us in their footprint area to provide the bonus when the student finishes their course. And so that's going and spreading around the state. We're going to try to get this in all 15 community colleges as we pick up more and more financial support from others. There's no state money for this, by the way, and my family pays all the administrative costs. So any donations we get in Second Chance, 100% of that goes to the student. We don't use any of the donated funds for administrative or salaries or anything like that. So, and then more recently, one of the things we've discovered in Mississippi is that they have an early childhood learning program for 4-year-olds. Which is not supported by very much money from the legislature, but they are allowed to solicit donor private funds and to give the donor a tax credit, dollar-for-dollar tax credit against state income tax. And so there are 14 of those collaboratives scattered around the state that take anywhere from 100 to 200 4-year-olds. And so now we're trying to we're doing this with 4 of them now, 4 of these 14 collaboratives, where the parents and primary caregivers of the students, the 4-year-olds, are given an opportunity to get the same educational chance, a GED and or a skill, if they don't have a skill. Some have a GED or a high school diploma, but don't have a skill, while their child is there. And so they go to the local community college and get the skill. The community colleges in Mississippi have tremendous physical facilities for training. They have labs, robotic labs. It's amazing. This is something I was totally unaware of before I got involved in adult education. But I'm going to take some time for questions here on that or litigation or anything else you want to ask me about, but prison. But that's the main thrust of our organization now, is to supplement and augment getting high school dropouts, that 500,000 high school dropouts we have in Mississippi, to start moving the needle a little bit and getting those people back into the mainstream, and maybe move Mississippi to 49th or 48th on the top 50 or the bottom 50 on the bottom 50 list. So that's in a nutshell what Second Chance does, and thank you for having me over here to talk about this.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, man. Okay, got plenty of time for questions? Yes, over here, please. And wait for the microphone.
Thank you for coming, hotty toddy.
Hotty toddy. We can't beat Arkansas. I wish we could. You guys have got our number.
Well, thank you for giving a new reason for us to say, thank God for Mississippi.
That's very nice. Very nice. Thank you.
I want to ask you, it's such a wonderful effort, but since agriculture and manufacturing have changed so much for both our states, what economic development movements have been made to make sure there is employment and to attract the industry that can use your better educated young people?
That's an excellent question. And some of the community colleges have good relationships with the employers in their areas. Some don't. Some have never even reached out to see what jobs are in demand by the local employers. And so one of the things we have done when we run across that at a particular community is to create a relationship between the adult education staff at the community college and the industry that might hire people. Milwaukee Tools is an example. They're a big employer down in the Mississippi Delta. And Mississippi Delta Community College is the community college in their footprint. And they had never gotten together. And before we just happened to call a meeting with them and kind of stumbled on the fact that the community college could, but had not yet, designed courses for the jobs that these people were being hired to fill. And so now they're getting together, designing a course and running 50 to 100 students. They're going to start running 50 to 100 students through that particular pathway at the community college. So there's not as much coordination between the employers and the trainers as there should be. And we're trying to foster that too. I should have mentioned that in my primary remarks. Paradoxically, Mississippi, the paradox is that Mississippi is 50th out of 51, if you count the District of Columbia. We're 50th in labor force participation rate, which is, to me, a lot more important than unemployment rate. Unemployment rate's like 4%, but only about half of the adults in Mississippi work. The only state that's worse than Mississippi is West Virginia. And that tells you it's not a racial thing. West Virginia is 97% white, and yet only half, not even half, West Virginians work, and barely half of Mississippians do. And that's true across the South. If you look at all the southern states, Arkansas will be down there too. Not that low maybe, but down there. But the paradox is that on any given day in Mississippi, there are 40,000 unfilled jobs. The Secretary of State keeps a list of this. 40,000 unfilled jobs. You give a daily report on that, just like you look at the stock market. Sometimes it's as high as 48,000 unfilled jobs. Sometimes as low as 35,000. But that's because there aren't trained people for those jobs. So it always tickles me when the governor or somebody announces this big plant coming in there is going to hire 5,000 people, and that's great. The state's giving away hundreds of millions of dollars in incentives for these industries to locate there, to create 5,000 jobs, but there are already 40,000 jobs that are unfilled because we don't have an educated workforce, educated and trained workforce. There's just not enough emphasis in any of the southern states, in my judgment, on middle skills and training for the modern economy. There are jobs out there that just aren't people being trained for those jobs or even being educated that jobs exist. And we're trying to get that awareness out there, which is a big part of what we're doing. I mean, this isn't what I set out in life to do. I mean, like I said, I came about it in a very unorthodox way in prison. But it was a silver lining in the dark cloud in my life, and I'm trying to keep it getting brighter and brighter. But it's a long answer to your question, but thank you.
Back here on the back row, yes.
You mentioned that there was about an 80% success rate in finishing the program. Are you all following the people that have finished the program and have gone to work? And what kind of success rate do you have that people have continued on in those jobs that they've gotten after they finished the program?
We've made sure that we count as success someone either going on with their education when they finish our sponsored program. They either go on with their education, meaning they get into an academic program at the community college or maybe even a four-year college. Once they get a GED, they're eligible for a Pell Grant. And that's one of the reasons the community colleges are anxious to get them a GED, because they've got a student there. It's like a high school. They've got their own high school to feed students in there, and they can get them a Pell Grant, which is scholarship money. But we count as success only those that continue on with their education, either academically or a more advanced degree in manufacturing or whatever the skill was, or go straight into a non-minimum wage job. The idea here is within 6 months to get a dropout, average age being about 27, 28, to get someone who has neither a diploma nor any kind of skill. In 6 months in this program, they get both. And we do follow up to make sure they have that before we count it as a success. And that's my 80% number. And that was the first class that we did. I don't know if those numbers are going to be quite that high across the board on all 250. That was just the first 50. Now, we had really good results with a nursing program over at Kahoma Community College across the river from here, which isn't very far, Clarksdale, if you know where that is in Mississippi. Zach, where are you? What do we have, about 23 out of 28?
We had 28 people in the program, and 21 got their nursing certification, either in EMT or CNA. And once they passed their boards, which we're still waiting on them to take the boards, then there are jobs waiting on them. A lot of these hospitals have MOUs with the community college that they will hire as soon as someone graduates from a nursing program. And I imagine that's the case with the community colleges in Arkansas too, and in most places. But so there's 21 people who couldn't get in a nursing program. We put them through we got them certified, got them admitted in the nursing program, and once they pass their boards, they'll be employed and on the way to
Yeah,
to
we're confident
productive
that,
life.
that all 21 of them. But that's one of the things we did. We didn't want a failure to start off with, so we kind of picked the most likely to succeed students for this program, and we're doing that in all 6 schools. We're taking people that come to the table with at least an 8th or 9th grade literacy level. If they don't have that, the chances are they're not going to get the GED anytime soon, or they're not going to be able to pass the work skill. Now, the community colleges have remediation courses to get them up to where they can read on that level. But again, that's a long answer to your question. We do try to follow them.
Yes, ma'am, right here, and then we'll come over here.
I worked in workforce education / industrial education for a lot of years here in Arkansas in a small community. And the question on do you have the jobs ready when they come out is one of the best and probably most frustrating parts of the whole training program. But another thing that I wasn't prepared for, and I'd just like to hear the Mississippi version, is the cultural influence that people could come out of the community college with a certificate in aviation maintenance, for example, and not be willing to move where the jobs are because their family is in this small rural community. They could have had jobs in Little Rock, they could have had jobs in Tulsa. I mean, the aviation community is screaming for jobs at high rates, and that's only one example. But I was not prepared to take in, or we weren't able to break that, even to get somebody to go away for 2 years and then come back, kind of thing.
That's a similar frustration we have in Mississippi. We haven't run up, at least so far, we haven't run up into a situation where jobs are remote from where these people live. Transportation is a problem for them, even to get to a job in their own counties. And that's something we haven't figured out how to solve yet. There's no public transportation in our state to speak of. And so that's a problem. Employers are going to have to start doing a little more to get their workers there too. People don't want to relocate, and they find ways to get by where they are. And so even if you get you get them a Harvard education, they're going to stay there in Itta Bena or wherever they are. They don't want to leave. So that's a frustrating thing, and I don't think we have the solution for it.
I think we have a question. Somebody has their hand up right here. Yeah.
Changing the subject, I was just thinking when at the beginning you mentioned Bob Stone, was it, sort of looked after you?
Bob Stone, right.
And there were murderers. Why were you not sent to a different prison, considering your conviction was for a nonviolent crime?
I've been asking that question for 10 years. I don't know. I don't know. I think the pretext was that I was a flight risk, and so they were going to put me behind the fence, behind the wire. Even though I self-surrendered, I'd never done a day in prison before. But, I'm not proud of the fact that I was convicted of judicial bribery, and they punished me pretty severely for that, and they should have. And maybe that was part of it. No, they shouldn't have put me there. It should have been a camp. And I was only there 1 year, and after that it was camp. I was there the first year. And it was a kind of rough place. It wasn't Shawshank Redemption, but it wasn't pleasant.
I think we had a question right over here.
In Mississippi, what's the situation regarding whether felons can go into public housing?
Felons are not able to get TANF drug felons are not able to get TANF or SNAP benefits, which is a frustration with us because we have tens of thousands of former ex-offenders in Mississippi who have a drug conviction. And a drug felony disqualifies anyone from getting any kind of federal assistance. SNAP recipients, food stamps, is essentially what SNAP benefits is, supplemental supplemental nutrition, whatever, SNAP.
Supplemental Nutrition Assistance.
Assistance program. Thank you.
Deans are far, you know.
But one of the frustrating things about Mississippi is that the legislation that created this program allowed states to opt out of that requirement so that states could, if the legislature so decided, allow former drug offenders to get SNAP assistance for education. Surprisingly, Texas opted out, Georgia opted out, last year Alabama opted out. So now their drug offenders can get back into a training program with federal assistance. We hadn't done it in Mississippi. It hadn't been tried yet in Mississippi, and that's one of the things we're going to try to work on. Because if you have a former offender and he can't get a job, he can't get trained for a job, he can get no assistance. You're asking for him to go back. You're asking for a higher recidivism rate. And I didn't feel like I was the right spokesman to crusade for that kind of prison reform or any sort of thing like that. Having been in prison myself, I wanted to focus on dropout recovery, essentially. But more and more I'm being asked to work on programs with the local prison, the state prison system, to get their offenders. There's no required GED program in there. And we have 20,000, essentially, men and women incarcerated in Mississippi at any given time. And there's no requirement that they get any kind of education or training while they're there.
Got a question right here.
Are there other states or federal programs similar to what you're doing?
I think other states are doing this more or less. I don't know that they're doing it as comprehensively as we're trying to do it with Second Chance. The only federal assistance for this kind of thing is what I just addressed, that we're aware of, to help people get back in the mainstream that if they have a drug conviction, which is the majority of the convictions are drug convictions, most of them nonviolent, but nevertheless, they're prohibited, at least in our state, from taking advantage of federal assistance there. I wish it weren't so.
Yes, sir. Got a question here.
You talked about how this second chance experience obviously changed your life. Could you talk about how your experiences changed your life in other ways?
How this experience then?
Yes. Well, your experience from going to prison and now getting involved with this, how else was your life changed by these experiences?
It gave me a pretty big dose of humility. Prison, I'd like to say I had a religious experience in prison. I didn't really have that. But I did have I did remember back when I was a Navy pilot, you may have heard that in my intro, they put you through a course, about a 2-week course before you're deployed in the Navy, in POW training. And one of the things they taught us in there was to ask yourself 3 questions if you're ever a POW. Why am I here? What am I doing here? And what can I do to help my fellow man? And those 3 questions, if you ask yourself that every day, will kind of sustain you. And I remembered some of that when I was in prison. And I think it gave me a sense of humanism to do what I could do to help my fellow man. It gave me a sense of purpose that I had essentially lost when I went to prison. I never thought I'd ever have a purpose again. And so this is a calling for me. I won't say it's a religious calling, but it's a moral calling. And I've now got my son working in this full time and some good friends, and we're enjoying it. It's helped reunite our family unit, give us our bearings back. I never thought I'd again speak to a group like this. This is a very special group. I'm sure you all know that. And it's a tremendous honor to be here. But there was a time in the last 10 years I doubted if I would be asked to speak anywhere, much less in a prestigious place like the Clinton School. I don't know if I answered your question. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Steele, and then we'll come back over here. We'll come over here. Yeah, this one right here.
Another personal question, if I might. So I read somewhere that you enjoy writing, and Mississippi's home to a lot of great writers. I'm wondering if we might ever see a novel or autobiography or something like that.
Well, thank you. I did do a autobiographical manuscript, but I don't think it's publishable. And it was something to pass the time. But I enjoy writing, but it's not fiction, and it's more kind of political writing that I like to do, and legal style writing. I like to comment sometimes on legal issues, like I'm often asked to. Yeah, I published an article about 6 months ago in a legal journal called Law 360, comparing the tobacco litigation with the opioid litigation that's going on. That sort of writing is what I like to do, and that's online if you want to read it. And interestingly, it's there are a lot of parallels in the tobacco litigation, which President Clinton was very instrumental in helping us succeed in back 20 years ago. There are a lot of parallels to that in what's going on with the gun issue now, where the NRA and it's a social issue beyond just a legal issue. It's a very important cultural issue, and there are some parallels that might apply now to that. But that's the kind of writing I like to do.
Well, I want to agree with Nate Steele, who just asked that question. I think you ought to write a book.
Well, thank you. Thank
you. Welcome. I was wondering if you could share with us what incentives Mississippi extended to Nissan to put an assembly plant along I-55 when most southern states have an auto or truck assembly plant. I don't believe we do. What did you do to get that plant, considering what you just said about the workforce problem you have in Mississippi?
That's an excellent question. I've never really asked myself that. I was not engaged in getting the Nissan plant to Mississippi, or the Toyota plant either. But I was involved in trying to lure Hyundai, the South Korean automobile manufacturer, to Mississippi 10 years ago, and we lost out to, in 2002, and we lost out to Alabama on that one. Having a skilled and educated workforce is extremely important, and economic opportunity as well. But it was really, I learned some things in the Hyundai experience. If you want to hear about one of the things that was important there that you would never expect in Hyundai's decision to go to Alabama versus Mississippi. I was asked to be part of a delegation, including the governor of Mississippi, who was a Democrat at the time, Ronnie Musgrove, and Trent Lott, who was the Senate Majority Leader at the time, who was my brother-in-law. And he's obviously a Republican, and so I was sort of the peacemaker between their two camps. And so we went to Korea, and to try to convince Hyundai to build a big plant near Meridian, Mississippi. And we spent a week over there, wining and dining and doing all kind of stuff, totally jet lagged. But they finally made the decision, not based on workforce, not based on site, financial incentives from the state, all the things that we were throwing at them. The thing that was important to Hyundai was which state's congressional delegation gave them the most protection for their steel industry in Mississippi. They were essentially using a car plant as a bone to whoever could help them sell more steel with less taxes over here, things you would never suspect. So most states have, in the South, are competitive in terms of having a skilled workforce. None of us have a really skilled workforce. None of the states in the South, in the Deep South, do. So there are often other factors that are important. Now, I don't know if that happened in the Nissan plant. I just don't know. But we couldn't get the thing into Mississippi, and Lott was the majority leader. So apparently Alabama delegation was more important to them than we were.
All right, this is, we're from the South. As you know, all things revert back to one thing, which is football. So we were talking earlier, Zach and you, we were talking, and could you just give us 1 minute on this proposed legislation in Mississippi that would allow people to carry guns into sporting events, which would mean guns at an Arkansas Ole Miss football game in Oxford? Yep.
I wish you hadn't asked me that question.
Well, you don't have to answer it, but
I'm going to try my best. To expand on that, the pending now in the Mississippi Senate, having already passed the Mississippi House of Representatives in this session that's in process now, a bill to allow people with enhanced concealed carry permits to bring weapons, firearms, onto college campuses in any capacity. This passed 2-1 in the state House of Representatives. The SEC found out about it, threatened to withhold sanction for postseason events in Mississippi if the Senate passed it. Well, the Senate still got it, and the chances are they're going to pass it anyway, which I think is absolutely absurd to have liquored up football fans, with pistols. I guess they'll shoot.
just Ole Miss football fans, Arkansas fans.
No, well, that's right. No, well, if you can be armed too. I want them to take the damn cowbells away from the Mississippi State people. I mean, we need a pistol to counteract that cowbell.
Well, I think the great work that the Scruggs family is doing with Second Chance Mississippi is an example that should be highlighted all over the country and perhaps all over the world. And it's one that I hope the Clinton School can engage more in. Would you all please give a great welcome to Dickie Scruggs?
Thank you.